it's Arenthio here again. This is another stream. I haven't done these streams in a very, very long time, but I met Emmy, right?
Yeah, I also just go by Emmy. That's my preferred name.
You're a streamer, right? And we talked about some pretty interesting stuff at the con at MFF. I don't know, like you seem to have similar experiences, or you seem to have experience with like people bullying you online, and I felt that that was something we could talk about on this stream.
Yeah, of course. I have I guess my handful of experiences in that kind of a regard.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about how, can you explain your drama situation if you're comfortable with doing that?
That's like a whole ordeal, but would you want me to put it in simple terms or like a whole in-depth explanation?
Just go through the whole thing.
So I guess this would require some context. So I stream on Twitch, but I'm kind of what you might consider to be like a unique streamer, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I stream for stuff on Twitch mostly, which, you know, might pique everybody's interest, whatever, but it's actually apparently found success enough to the point where Twitch has partnered me.
Cool.
I guess in that regard, I have Twitch's approval, which is, I guess, always a blessing. So this started like a few days after I got partner, which was like, I think like actually it happened on my birthday, if I'm not mistaken, like literally at like 12:05 on my birthday, like in the morning. And yeah, it was basically people were like upset about both like, you know, that I stream like my vor stuff on Twitch, as well as like various just like frivolous aspects of the vor community. And what started off as like people critiquing me kind of blew out of proportion as like all these people kind of came out of the woodwork to like shit on me and like trash my reputation over like every single possible thing they could take out of context.
Would you say that your opposition was larger than you? Like, by that I mean, were there more people predisposed to believing them than believing you, since maybe more people watched their quote-unquote critique videos of you rather than watching your videos on the topic, since usually that tends to warp public perception, right? Like if a really good example might be if J.K. Rowling said something distasteful about like a trans account with 2 followers, right? People are probably more likely to believe J.K. Rowling than that 2-follower trans account, right? Since that's the first thing they see, and that's the first impression that people tend to have towards a certain, like, any drama situation, right? Like, would you say that's similar to what you've experienced?
Yeah, honestly, like admittedly, I will say like I was probably one of the bigger accounts. So it was a lot of smaller accounts coming at me, but a lot of the issue mostly stemmed from, I guess, a lot of people's exposure of me being like these accounts, right?
Right. So
because
like,
the issue is those accounts going like viral. Yeah.
So like collectively that was the case, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I mean, would you say that what do you call it? I mean, would you say that there was like ringleaders in that situation? Was it more of a would you say it wasn't too grassroots, or would you say it was more of a certain group of people that want to create a certain narrative about you, and that was the, what do you call it, the engine that perpetuated this drama, if that makes sense?
So it was definitely initially it just kind of seemed like random in terms of like just suddenly people starting to talk about me. But after like some, I guess, due diligence and research, I was able to kind of figure out where this came from, and I realized that this was definitely more of a targeted attack and way less of it just happened that people like all suddenly had issue with me.
Right.
Mostly because I realized that a lot of the people that called me out or were quote unquote calling me out and spewing all these like unfounded like accusations happened to all also be located primarily on one Discord, which was someone who I have had issues with previously.
I mean, I've had similar situations with drama situations I've been in, right? I mean, often it tends to be targeted, and it seems that it's almost like pulling at straws at a certain point, right? Accusation can be so absurd. Was your situation like they made up something, and then they continued making these accusations more and more absurd until it just becomes unbelievable, right? And at that point, you could make a video on it, and people will realize that, well, if people do see the video, then they'll realize that it's been fabricated, right? If they're not super predisposed to really liking a streamer or really liking a YouTuber or having that kind of quote-unquote bias, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, thankfully there wasn't ever any like real YouTube coverage. There was, I think, one YouTube person on YouTube with like a very, very small following that made a video.
Yeah.
And with them, it was like they were recording, like I think it was like they live streamed. They were live streaming, and then they talked about the subject on their stream, and they, you know, morphed that into a video. And when I watched that initially, I was like, oh boy, like here's my very first drama YouTube video. And then it mostly seemed like they just took my side in all of it, because like they were just kind of sitting there like, all right, you know, that you want to say like, oh, Emmy's a pedophile, like where's the evidence? It's like stuff like that, you know. It's like people don't have evidence, and so thankfully I haven't had any like big drama person target me as far as I'm aware.
That would suck.
At least in terms of YouTube.
Yeah.
Twitter, a little different, but you know.
I feel like Twitter is more short-lived as far as the drama stuff is concerned. Usually, I mean this is something that's politically as well, right? Like usually, when there's an initiative to something like that, it usually isn't very long-lived, right? It doesn't last very long.
Oh no, just I mean, I was pretty much just gonna say that point. It's very short-lived, but my thing was I kind of just like made my statement and then I like dropped Twitter for like a week, let people sort themselves out, and it was pretty interesting to see that like there was a handful of people that were like, even like after I had basically been, most of this is unsubstantiated, but even like for like the one or two things that you guys have problems with, you know, I'll work to improve that, blah, blah, like a very just professional, like addressing everything that they had, and these people would still just be going and like spewing vitriol for like a week, and I'm like what is happening? Like what? I mean, hell, even like most of the people who started it, right, like that were the ones tweeting like, I don't know, Emmy's kind of bad or whatever. Eventually, like I was able to get in contact with them in DMs, and we worked stuff out. Every single one of them. Like one person had claimed death threats and stuff, and I told them, I reached out to them, and I was like, hey, anyone, like if you find anyone's giving you a death threat or whatever, like I'm like, tell me, especially if it's like someone from my community, like I will ban them and blacklist them from my stream, my Discord, everything. And they're like, oh wow, okay. And then there was another person that I've reached out to that was like had issue with me as well, same thing. I was just like, hey, like if anyone's harassing you over this, blah blah blah, I don't want like any issues between us. And immediately after I messaged those two people, like they were fine. So it was, I guess, an interesting shift. But then it was like these like smaller people that were still just like, I mean, like every tweet that they were putting out was basically just like
it just
awful.
Seems
like they would go, they went through my art. What?
It just seems that you were kind of like whacking moles, if that makes sense. Like it's kind of like a game of whack-a-mole. Like you have some people that like make shit up about you, and you have to like follow these people around and like show them the evidence or whatever, right? Which I feel like is something that I've had to deal with before.
Well, my whole thing is, at the end of the day, if someone is going to make a claim that says, like, for example, I don't know, like, Emmy is a serial killer. I don't know, I'm just throwing some random shit out there. Thankfully, that was not one of the accusations, but it's like, okay, that's great. They need, you know, you need to have evidence for that.
Right,
like, you can't just...
I mean, the issue, I think the main crux of the issue that I think we've talked about earlier was, people tend to believe the first thing that they hear, right? That's what I have noticed. I mean, the issue with that is it's not necessarily a situation where the evidence you have or the arguments you have really matter as much as post or video or whatever it might be, how many people that reaches, right? And I think that's one of the main issues social media may generate as far as drama is concerned. Like it's often an issue of exposure than the actual facts on the ground, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, exactly. That's kind of the main thing, is it's like, you know, yeah, people will believe the first thing, and honestly, at the end of the day, my philosophy is mostly just, if somebody is like gonna believe the first thing, you know, or whatever, then like by all means they believe it. And if they block me or don't care for me, then at the end of the day, that's not someone I need to care about.
Right.
You know, like if that person is that, like if someone's that quick both like a random person as well as someone who maybe is like in my audience. If they're like that quick, just be like, yeah, I this fuck Emmy, blah blah blah. She's awful. She's a racist, blah blah blah. You know, then it's like I don't need that person in my audience. You know, like if you're if you're gonna believe someone else without trying to make sure like without even waiting for me to have anything to say or hearing my side of view, like point of view, then that's it. Like, you know, it's just not worth worrying about. At the end of the day, anybody in a public eye is gonna have people critiquing them. At the end of the day, you generally don't need to worry or impress those kind of people.
I mean, it's just, I mean, for me, the main issue is if someone like that has a platform, then they might create like this preconceived notion that people going forward that interact with you might have this preconceived notions of you, right? Even though it's not substantiated, or even if it's what do you call it? It's not necessarily something that is very representative of you, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, with me, it mostly is just at the end of the day, same thing. If somebody has those preconceived emotions, then like it's not my job to convince everybody.
Yeah.
After a certain point, you know, people will form their opinions, and if that opinion means that, you know, they think I'm like evil, then you know, then I'm like evil. It's not, like, you know, I personally don't feel like I have to, you know, explain and justify myself to people in terms of that. Like if somebody comes to me and is like, hey, I heard these things that were going on, what happens? I will tell them like my side of view, blah blah blah. But like if they're just gonna have a preconceived notion and ignore me, because at the end of the day, there's so many people, and with the prevalence of social media, it's like you really can't just focus on every like single thing. I mean, I had viewers right on my stream that have been watching for like 6 months. One guy who's been watching me for 2 years,
right? And
literally when this drama broke out, they just blocked me on Twitter and everywhere else and did not talk to me. I like, so at the end of the day, I'm like, it hurt, but you know, I can't I fixate on that.
I don't know, maybe I think we talked about this earlier, but I mean, as someone with a platform, I mean, I have a small platform, you have a platform, we can kind of get around these drama situations more than that 2-follower trans account we talked about, right? Like whenever stuff like this happens, we have the capability, what do you call it, like making a video proving your points, what do you call it, instead of having to like individually tell people X, Y, and Z, right? And like show X, Y, and Z, which I feel is something that's frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, being able to have a video and explain stuff does definitely help. Wouldn't necessarily say it's like the end all be all though.
Right.
You know? I mean, I didn't make a video about the sect. I mean, technically I did, but I didn't. Like, in the sense of, I spoke to that person, right? That made the like first video talking about the drama, and they like interviewed me. I kind of spoke, you know, about like my points of it and like how I felt like, you know, X and Y, and I showed a lot of evidence. Of course, I don't know if the person
I feel like that doesn't really matter very much, but like I don't know, maybe you're lucky, maybe you were able to solve this issue, your issue, amicably, and you're able to, or like it's not personally driven in a way, right? Like I don't know, I felt like when we first talked, I felt like the drama situation with you was more personally driven than what do you call it, based on something in particular they don't like about you, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it started personal, but then it evolved because of like the Twitter hive mind from that. Because it started off with people bringing out like some moderate criticisms about not liking an aspect of Vor that I was into, that I like personally enjoyed, and then it evolved into much more like attacks on character and stuff. Yeah. And apparently, and I can't substantiate this because I have no idea, but apparently I have white knights. I could not fucking tell you how that happens, and I don't really condone that behavior. But apparently that was part of what caused a lot of stuff. Is it's my quote unquote some white knights of whom I have no idea, like defend me and message these people, and some people getting more toxic than others. I have no idea at the end of the day. But it started becoming way like less about the initial issue to where it evolved into like anything somebody find on me, like, oh, Emmy, like one of the things was like, oh, you know, because I have a person of color in my Twitter bio, that means that, like, they're like, oh, but on every photo she's shown of herself, she's white, so it's like she's not a person of color. I find that funny because I'm like, well, yeah, I am. I'm Hispanic.
Right.
Like, people were like, oh, I'm racist. I'm assuming culture. I'm a racist person. I'm to quote someone who deleted their tweet. It was like Emmy is doing the black equivalent for Hispanic people because I exist. So it's like, but at the end of the day, it wasn't beef with like one person. If that makes any sense.
Yeah,
I mean, like I said, I'm
understand.
pretty sure I know. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I know who did it.
Yeah, I mean,
I can't once again.
I don't know, for you
go
it
ahead.
seems like more of an audience-driven sort of drama situation, at least for me. I'm not gonna talk about my drama, I'm obligated not to be specific about it, but for me it seemed to be sort of top-down rather than more, I don't like to say grassroots, but more viewer-driven, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, viewer driven as well as like other people's like Twitter following and stuff.
Right.
I would argue it's like, I don't know. There wasn't, as far as I could tell, there wasn't a specific person really, because I made with most of the people that were causing problems, or, the ones that actually either took the time to reach out to me or would have their DMs or something open so I could like attempt to converse with these people. But to those that blocked me and stuff, and then were continuing to spew vitriol, like legitimately could not give a single like flying fuck about them.
Yeah.
If somebody's that immature, then like I said, I think I know who did it. I don't want to ever like out that was at least out of like any sort of personal circle. But yeah, and same thing. They blocked me like the day before the drama happened. So I'm just like, but I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know, because from everything I knew, they weren't even really spewing anything against me,
Right.
like at all. But they were having like suspiciously everyone that was Discord server spewing stuff out about me. So I'm like, whack. But yeah, I don't know. It was definitely like, yeah, the thing is, there wasn't like one person to address.
Maybe
so
it was
like
more,
the only thing I could really.
maybe it's more difficult to, it was a more difficult situation with you, because at least for me, once I dealt with the head of the driving force of the drama situation, it all of a sudden ended, right? Like all of a sudden people lost interest because it was very much more of a top-down sort of situation. But with you, it seems like it's a situation where you have various little sources of drama, and if you somehow conversed with one of them, that wouldn't really do much for the rest of the crowd, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's much more of a crowd, and that's kind of the hard part. Is just like not really feeling sure who to like talk to, because there wasn't anybody I could just go to and be like, yeah, okay, let me just like try to make up with this person. It just wasn't an option like present for me.
I mean, what
Which
I
is, like,
what I
unfortunate.
personally found frustrating was what do you call it? Like I typically talk about how audiences usually translate some kind of power in the community, and I mean that's been a reoccurring theme on my channel for, I mean, maybe even 2 years at this point, right? And I've even talked about this on my older channels, right? And I just feel like, I mean, I don't think, it might be out of bad faith, but not really engaging with that main idea I have, and kind of like tackling some peripheral sort of tone policing sort of issue rather than tackling the main points of the channel, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
yeah.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, maybe that's different with you because you don't tackle like specific issues. It's more of a entertainment base, I guess. I mean, I guess in that situation it would be more of an identity thing than actually. Well, for me, it wasn't. I mean, there was this channel that with like 200 followers that like made a video on me, and it was about like, I mean, at least he got down the part where I tackled consumerism in the furry community, right? Like but the main issue there was that consumerism is kind of a key pillar of that social capital, right? Like for example, in the furry community is very consumption based, right? So you have things like fursuits, you have things of like fancy VR avatar, good fursuits, and so on, going to cons, and so on and so forth, and that's really integral to our culture here, right? And if you can't afford to do those things, that often puts you at a disadvantage, right? Like even with platforms, even with making connections and so on and so forth. Like I met you in real life, right? I feel like I have a closer connection with you and probably you as well, by interacting in real life, right? And that's not really a luxury that most people have if they can't go to a bunch of cons, right?
Yeah, that's one of the main things. Yeah, that is definitely a luxury that especially people who go to cons will take for granted a lot of the time.
And little things here and there seem to suggest that monetary value in large part like converts into social capital, right? I mean that also seems to be the case with other communities, right? Like I think there was a video on RedTube. I think I referenced him in one of my videos. His name was like Daniel Torres, and he referenced that usually there are barriers to entry to even creating a viable platform. I mean, obviously you don't need to have software and all of these little bells and whistles that will help you along the way to making a channel, for example, and having the extra time, right? If you look at it from a bird's eye view, it's definitely going to favor some demographics over others, right? But in the furry community, I mean, I talked about this a million times, but in the furry communities, though, those barriers to entry seem to be a lot more intense, right? Because it's a lot more consumption based than something like the online left.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the furry community is very very consumption based. You are 100% hitting that on the fucking head.
I don't know, like even with the time thing, like I have some friends that I met at MFF. Some of them didn't seem to be able to make as many videos as they usually do, since maybe they have like some financial issues or something relating to that in some kind of way. Like even if they have like family issues, right? That might give them a financial handicap because they can't like rely on their parents as much, right? And I mean that's kind of a difficult situation. I mean I feel bad for those kinds of people, you know.
I mean the situation can always be like, you know, it's very different depending on the person.
Yeah.
But I feel like with the financial benefits equaling to social capital is definitely true.
And
I mean, what you hit
like,
on the head with fursuits.
Yeah, and I mean it's frustrating to observe this kind of thing. It's kind of frustrating.
Yeah, I mean honestly, you know, and speaking about like fursuits, I would have to say that I honestly kind of have a lot of issues with like fursuits in general in the community.
Yeah.
That's probably like my most like controversial opinion. I
mean, you don't have to talk
personally,
about it if you're not.
I think that fursuits have started off as a foundational like benefit to the community as an identity, but they've slowly evolved, or I guess you could say devolved, at the point of being very toxic for the overall growth and benefit of the community.
Yeah. So like you have to have
having a fursuit is like
right?
a social status. Yeah, and then it's like you have to have a good one. And I've noticed this over the years. It's like, you know, people just like, oh yeah, I want to go to cons, blah blah blah. So now it's like people don't want to go to cons, and I ask them, it's like, oh well, I want to get a fursuit first. It's like, well, why? Well, now there's this whole, you know, there's always this common like misconception that you need one to like be a furry at this point. And it's like, oh, well, that's all you see in the media is like, oh, big fancy fursuits, big colorful things. And it's like, you don't like need one of those. But there's just this status of like, you're not a furry if you don't have a fursuit.
It kind of like just sets an expectation that people are like obligated to follow, right? Like for example, maybe in the trans community, right? Like if it's like a male to female trans community, like maybe in some cases they would expect you to be conventionally attractive for being quote unquote female, right? Like there are financial barriers to that, right? And that might set an expectation that like everyone's supposed to follow, and if you don't fit that standard, then like you're kind of looked down upon. And I feel like, I mean, same thing with the other sectors of the LGBT community, and I feel like that's the same thing with the furry community, right? Like it sets a standard that might be hard to achieve for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I mean that's the main thing is like people feel like obligated that they have to have this fursuit, and that's like one of the only things in the fandom I can really think of. I mean, there's other minute things that can kind of conception, but not really. I'd say like art is a big one, but I would say art is not as bad. Art is a little bit of a different vibe. Like I've never met somebody who says like I have to have art to be a furry. Like no, but I like mean,
it helps, but
the fursuit.
Yeah.
No, the fursuit is always the crux. And like an art piece, like you could commission an art of like art. You could literally find an artist who for like $5, you know, the price of a foot long, will like draw your character based on descriptions. Like I mean, there's people of all sorts of skill levels who very much will produce you like a quality product no matter your price range. But like fursuits are like multiple $1,000s. Like some people might not even see that kind of tangible money to begin with after, who knows how long.
I mean, think
And
about
so
the
it's just like-
opportunity cost as well, right? Like, if you're, I mean, let's be like, let's say you're 20, right? And you want a fursuit. It's gonna be kind of difficult to, that might not be the case in 2 or 3 years, right? As far as like disposable income is concerned, right? If you have other costs to pay, if at all. I don't know, by the time you do have the fursuit, I feel like you miss out on a lot in that 2 or 3 years or 1 year, whatever it might be, right?
Yeah, that's really just the crux of it. It's like there's a lot to miss out on, and I really not like the conception, like the feeling of missing out, and
Also,
that's more of it's less. Oh, sorry.
Also, one more thing is, have you noticed this kind of like power creep as far as fursuits are concerned? Like, fursuits get better and better, but I mean, there's kind of a flip side to that benefit, right? Like, it seems that the expectations go up, and the prices go up and accordingly, right? You're kind of expected to pay more and more money. It's very difficult for the majority of people to achieve that standard.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, the price cost is not really one of my biggest concerns. I'm more worried. I'm definitely more concerned and focused on the stigmata that it creates. Because the fandom itself as a whole has become very like materialistic. Even if it doesn't, like, even if you ask anybody, they will say it's not. Like, oh, like if you were to ask, like,
is it taboo?
I don't know,
or
like,
something? I mean, I just feel like it's
such a taboo concept to. If for example, if you were to make a video that's like the problem with fursuits,
yeah,
it doesn't matter if like you are just like generally talking about like moderate issues.
Yeah,
you will be ripped apart because that's like, oh, you're attacking the core concept of the fandom. Like, and even though like there are very much problems with fursuits present, it's like such a stigmata to talk about. In fact, I would argue it's one of the worst things you could like even moderately talk about the fandom, besides maybe like certain LGBT like exclusivity that could potentially occur.
Yeah,
because like fursuits are like such a foundational thing. Like, I mean, hell, like, you don't see really any furry YouTubers, that don't have like fucking kick-ass fursuits half the time, like,
yeah, it's very rare.
I mean, granted, the furry YouTuber of like, oh, look at my fursuit, haha, aren't I so cool and important, it's kind of dipped off in the years, a couple years back.
Yeah, I'm very happy
if you were to
about
ask
that.
me, I would, if you were to ask me a couple years back, I'd be like, oh man, like, oh great, there's another furry YouTuber that's like, what's their personality, gay in with a fursuit. Oh, okay. But now not so much. I definitely see
I just feel like
a bit more of an expansion.
I just feel like a lot of the community, the YouTube sphere, is kind of not as relevant as it used to be. So I feel like based on that, what do you call it? Like, there's not necessarily, I mean, it's just I just feel like the proportion of the YouTube sphere that do the fursuit thing, it's either declining or it's at least like declining relative to like the other content, if that makes sense. I don't know which one it might be. I might do some research on it.
It's definitely on the decline. I mean, I don't watch a lot of furry YouTube, honestly. The few, like, the small sect of people I watch, I consider like my friends. So I watch them just to see if they pump out, or they're people I've at least met in person.
Right.
But that's about it. Like, I don't really care. I cared for it when I was in like joining the fandom, because it's just like I'm like a sponge. I'll be like, oh, this new game, this new concept, this new whatever. Yeah. I'm gonna watch like 40 hours worth of YouTube and absorb every little bit of information. And the thing with the furry fandom, granted, like, I mean, before that, I didn't really know like a huge amount, but I'm like, I learned what conventions were. I learned what, fursuits were and shit. And that was huge. But
maybe it's just because like furries are just getting older in general, right? Like, maybe they're not in their late teens anymore. Maybe they're in their early 20s. And the type of content that appeals to them changes over time, right? So it's not like fursuit, yay, that's the only thing that the channel offers, right? I feel like
no, it's still there.
Oh yeah.
It's just not on YouTube.
Yeah.
No, well, you're seeing it much because there's less like younger audiences and shit on YouTube. They're still there. I mean, you still have some of these people, like, I mean, hell, if I go on YouTube right
Like
now and I search like,
dream cringe.
I would say furries don't have like a dream problem. Like we don't, I don't think there's anyone I would consider in the furry fandom to be like the equivalent of dream.
Yeah.
Maybe like there's a few handful of people that I can think of that like might equate, but like even then their stan nature is not that bad, but definitely their behavior can be like that.
Yeah.
But those are definitely more like Twitch oriented people.
Yeah.
But like, no, the audience for this stuff is still there. And I look up on YouTube and I look up like Fluke the Husky, right? This guy is like the definition of his content is mostly just gay and with a fursuit, and I respect it. I mean,
Yeah.
by all means,
I just don't
represent
get it,
yourself. I don't get the concept. Like I don't. That's not a good way to say it. It's not my thing. But if it's just like something that like financially supports this person and it's not hurting anybody, by all means. But like, you know, Fluke is an example of like kind of content that like, you know, a couple years back, I mean 4 or 5 years ago, that was like all of furry YouTube.
Yeah.
Now furry YouTube is a bit more expansive, and I'd say a lot of the like old guard doesn't really produce that kind of stuff anymore. But you know, you still have some examples. I'd say a lot of it has moved to Twitch and TikTok. Right. TikTok especially, that's fucking landmine I don't ever touch, but I know that that's kind of like a huge thing there. It's like, you know, people just make TikToks of, like dancing in fursuit, and it's like, oh,
yeah,
it's like
it's
super
just
successful.
Cringe, honestly, like it's the same way that I feel it's cringe, in the same way that like if you watch a Jake Paul video, right, like or like a video where people flex their material goods and apparently that makes people happy, right? Like I don't get it. It just seems like someone like shitting in your face and like them liking that for some reason. Like it just doesn't make sense to me, you know?
I hate, like, with a burning passion, flex behavior.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily say that they're cringe. I mean, like I said, I don't TikTok people, I don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
I know that the few people I know that like do like, oh, you know, my fursuit is kind of my personality thing on YouTube. I wouldn't say they're cringe. You know, if it works, it works. You know, that's what garners clicks. I don't get it really. I just don't understand. Like I hate flexing. I think it's like one of my biggest things. And you know, like people. But some people, that's like a personality trait to them, and people enjoy that. Like they like to be flexed on. I don't understand that.
I just can't put.
I know that is like one of
space. Like it seems masochistic to me.
Well, I mean, for me, I don't get it in the sense of like I don't understand the benefits of it, and it's one of the few ways to like actually upset me if somebody is just a flexy person. I mean, I have people in my DMs, right, that'll like message me and they'll be like, you know, it's interesting conversation topics to start off with, and then they just start like flexing art that they get.
Yeah.
And like, okay. And usually when that happens, you know, someone wants like a commission or something, but there's some people that just don't, like, they just keep flexing, and I'm like not sure what they're trying to achieve. Because, you know, I can understand someone saying like, oh, I've gotten like this art piece and that art piece. Hey, would you want to get something? It's like, oh, that's reasonable. But like some people just keep flexing. Like that is just all they do. And it's like, I don't understand it. It gets to the point sometimes with the fandom where there are like some individuals who kind of make me sick with how they flex. Like how hard somebody is just flex. There used to be this one person, I'm not going to name names, who I just like hated. Purely because anytime this person opened their mouth or like responded in a chat, in a Discord, it was always to somebody in like the most subtle way.
Yeah.
And it would be like, oh yeah, like someone would, it was like there was an art channel where people would just post art that they liked or found like, you know, hot, interesting, whatever.
Yeah.
And literally anytime it was like some big artist name or whatever that would post it in there, they'd be like, oh yeah, that artist is in my DMs and they want to fuck me. Or, oh, haha, I hooked up with that artist at for a convention here, and or oh yeah, I have a whole comic coming for, like just shit like that. And it's just like, of course everybody like in the, you know, server of mutual chat would just be like, oh, that's so cute, haha, that's so cool. And I'm over here like, what is the point of saying any of that?
I don't get it. Yeah, I just feel like it's rewarding bad behavior in a sense. It's not just in the furry community, but on YouTube in general or social media platforms in general. Like I don't get why people cheer that shit on. Like it's just something that I don't understand.
I mean, I don't know there. That's why I generally like avoid people. I mean, I have a sticker on Telegram that I made for that person. Would you like to see it?
Sure.
I
I mean,
commissioned a
do you want
sticker
to show
just
it on
to.
the? Do you want to show it on the podcast or
I
should I
could,
just keep it?
yeah, I could screenshot it. I'll screenshot it and then send it in the Discord.
Yeah.
So if you want to like when you go and edit it, you can show it. Where is our like chat? Hold on.
I'm also going to edit
Yeah,
out all the shitty parts.
Oh, that's fine. I mean, I'll let you edit it however you feel fit. I'll find that in the background. We can keep talking.
Right. Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned earlier, I just find it weird that like any mild criticism, as far as like structural issues in the community are addressed, like anything structural, any like mild criticism towards that, people tend to not like. I mean, not even just from the grassroots level, right? Like not just like the population in general. Like if people with a platform, if their interests don't align with you making a criticism of that structural issue, again, it just seems to be this raw, graspy situation where like they don't seem to actually want to address the main crux of the issue I talk about, and mostly is like these peripheral things that don't apply to it, because like they know that if they address the main issue here, like they're not gonna look good, right? Since it's so obvious, and like so it's like a water is wet situation, but like it's just something that people don't like to talk about, right? Like it's like for example, the fursuit price thing, right? You don't really have to go very far to understand that I mean, it's expensive, right? And that's something that might affect a lot of people, right? And when someone doesn't like that, right, they might go for these like peripheral issues, like oh, I don't like the way you said that or something, right? Like it's not concerning like the main issue that I talk about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's the main thing is, like I said, they're seen as a very foundational part of the fandom. I mean, even in like the early days, you know, people were still fursuiting, but it was, at least back then, that was definitely more of an expression, you know, full expression, and it still is. You know, I'm not saying like every fursuiter is flexing or every maker is, you know, blah blah blah, but like, you know, it's definitely like there's more of a status symbol.
Yeah.
You know, where wearing a fursuit becomes more of an equivalent to like a Supreme, and once again, this isn't like every person who gets fursuit is like this. It's like a small subset of people that kind of create this perception. But like,
Right.
I mean, at MFF, for example, I was in a room full of fursuiters. I mean, each of those fursuits were easily like, I don't know, like $7,000-8,000. I mean, this is like a big
I mean,
maker.
We've
their work.
been there together. I mean, which one are you talking about? Oh, I think I noticed.
Yeah, they're big, and they're all sweet, and like none of them it's for that like flex, the expression. All of them just want to express being a character, and it's like that's beautiful, you know. But like it's a small set of people that flex. But then even then, just the existence of fursuits, I feel like in a way because of like the negative people, the existence becomes its own.
It's like
toxic.
It's kind of like if you go into like an office, right, and everyone's wearing a suit. The expectation there, even if that's not part of the dress code, is probably to wear a suit, right? But I don't mean fursuit by this, but like a business suit, right? If that makes sense.
I mean that's the thing is it's like, and if you look up like I look up like MFF 2022, right, on like YouTube, and I go and I can see if there's like con footage. Like you look at like con footage, right? And this is the stuff like this is what everybody sees. You know, 'cause at MFF, you walk around. There's definitely like way more people not in fursuit than in fursuit.
Yeah, but
like,
the ones that are actually recorded, like it just like the actual demographic is that like most people don't have a suit, right? But the ones that are like recorded and put on social media, or the ones with people in suits, right? So it's not.
Well, yeah, because
really
that's what they're gonna focus on.
It's not representative of the population.
Yeah, that's what they focus on, though. I mean, but it makes sense, you know. If you're at a like FurCon, you're not gonna just record like the guy sitting there like chugging of like a Miller Lite in the corner, just vibing on his phone or whatever while waiting to meet up with a friend. You're gonna record like, you know, the cute, big, floofy, you know, fursuiter.
Yeah.
You know, that's like, I don't know, some like big radioactive squirrel. It's like huge. It's like you know, a quadrupedal suit. It's like awesome, you know. But the thing is, you know, it makes sense like why you record this, because that's like the shit people want to see. But then at the same time, you know, it's like people, that's what their perception is I mean, when I ask on stream, I mean, I wish I had like recorded examples of this, but like when I ask on stream, like, oh, I'm going to MFF, right? And people would be like, oh, like, you know, what's MFF? And I'd be like, oh, it's a FurCon. They're like, oh, well, a lot of people are like, I don't want to go until I have a fursuit. And I'm like, well, why? And they're like, oh, well, you know, I don't feel like I'd be part of the fandom if I don't have a fursuit. I'm like, I just hate that perception is there. Like, conventions are so much fun without the need of a fursuit, but we create such a reliance on it as like a fandom. But then everyone will say, oh yeah, you don't need a fursuit to go. But like in reality, the social stigmata is you kind of do.
Do you know what my favorite argument is that I like to kind of make fun of? It's you don't need a fursuit to be a furry, right? I mean, that's technically true, but like it's a little reductive of like these more like specific issues, right? Like you can technically be a airplane enthusiast without an airplane, right? But if you want to actually participate, I know it's like a niche, expensive hobby or something, right? But like you can still be an airplane enthusiast without like owning or renting an airplane, right? But like if you want to actually participate in that community, like you're probably going to at least need to like rent one, right? And like take the lessons and so on and so forth, right? Like I don't know, it's kind of a niche example, but like I feel like it's kind of like the situation with the furry community, right? Like I feel like it's a barrier to entry, not a hard barrier, but more of a soft barrier, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, like once somebody like, you know, I guess it just depends on the situation, but like once somebody like, you know, actually interacts with more furries and stuff, like something that really helped me even get past that stigmata was like interacting with my local fur group and making friends there and realizing like out of like my local group for my like city, you know, that I live in, it's like 3 people had fursuits.
I don't know.
I think there was like
I think,
5, and then 2 of them moved.
I think it also depends on like where you live, right? Like I feel like if you go to an area where people have like more money or something, there tends to be more suits. And if you go to like a more rural area, you tend to see less suits, right? I've noticed that with conventions. When I go to one in like North Carolina or something, like you see less suits and they're less elaborate. But if I go to one in like, I don't know, New York or something, then there tends to be more and they tend to be more elaborate, right? That's just my observation.
I mean, yeah, and you know, that makes sense as well. It's a bigger population for there to be representative of that kind of stuff.
I mean,
as
like,
well as like,
I mean, pound for pound, not just like overall, right?
it's just I don't know. It's a weird like juxtaposition that's created. I mean, I just noticed with my local group. You know, I live in a pretty populated area, so it's like seeing both how few fursuits there were, as well as like realizing that, you know, oh well, a lot of these people are just existing and having a good time without having like a $3,000-$4,000 fursuit, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can have fun with that as well.
I don't know.
I don't have to feel like obligated.
I feel like I'm just predisposed criticizing economic issues because I mean I remember even in like elementary school.
Yeah, and I mean that makes sense though, honestly.
Yeah.
Like really, it does make sense. I don't know. I mean, I just like I said, that's probably one of the biggest like opinions I have is that I think fursuits are are much more detrimental to people that are newer to the fandom because they create a lot of preconceived notions that aren't true.
I'm very glad
it's mostly due to a subset of people.
I'm really glad that that's kind of being like phased out, at least on YouTube, right? Like the situation where like, that's the main way to gain social capital or whatever. Like I'm glad that that's becoming more diversified in a sense from what I've heard from you. But yeah.
I mean, yeah, and the thing is, it can't really be present on Twitch either, because like nobody's gonna first like stream in their fursuit as a career. But that's when you get more into like fancy models and stuff. But I would say like a fancy 3D model is less detrimental in my opinion.
Is it more
than
expensive, or is it cheaper?
It's not. I mean,
so it's more accessible,
who
right,
you ask.
the majority of people.
It's much more accessible. I mean, like some of the biggest streamers, like some of the bigger streamers on Twitch that like are in the same vein as like 3D tubers and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just 3D. There's also like flat, but like 3D, I mean, some of them just use like base models that you can get for like $20-$30 and then pay somebody a little bit extra, or just get a friend who wants to practice to just recolor it, and there you go.
Yeah,
you have a fancy model for like nothing. Now granted, there's other aspects that still like accentuate the stream, but like just the model itself. And that's also a model that you could like pretty much just throw into Unity and slide into VR chat and play. That's way less of a huge barrier to entry. And I think that's probably why VR chat is like so huge, because in a lot of ways you remove like, oh, I need a fursuit. It's like, oh, well, I have $35. You know, I'll buy this model for 20 and pay a friend 15 or whatever to quickly recolor it to look like my pink sparkle fox. But it's like, then it's like, you know, it's that everybody has access to it. So like in VR chat, I really don't feel like there's a lot of ways that you can flex.
I don't know, like
in that sense.
I guess that's only time will tell, or based on if I do further research on the whole VR chat situation, because I'm a little unfamiliar with it, and I mean honestly I didn't bring my headset to my dorm, so I don't use it much, right? So maybe it might be helpful to look into it a little more and I don't know, figure out that dynamic on VR chat. You know? I
mean, I noticed the real like only like stigmata is if you don't have like a model that moderately represents your character. Yeah. But like even then, that's not, like I said, it's a very low barrier to entry. I mean, models are becoming more excessive. I mean, they already were cheap. Those free models you can use. Like, yeah, you might not be able to have your fox colored exactly, but you could find like a fox model that looks good and just wear that around, and then eventually just buy the model and go from there. I mean, I don't hear people complaining. Like, I never hear people. The thing people say is like, oh, I don't want to get on VR chat because I don't have a headset. But even then, there's a huge amount of people that just play it in desktop mode, so they can just vibe and chat. Like, they treat it like they're playing like Second Life or something, but like hanging out and vibing with people. And I think it's a much more accessible version of the fandom that is like, I'm actually really like all for. But like, there's no flex, you know, like, yeah, okay, you could have like a fancy custom model that you spend like $500 on, but like at the end of the day, you know, that's just for bells and whistles. And it's also just bells and whistles. Like most of nothing in that like model is going to do anything different. Yeah, like might have a cool animation, might have cool features, you know, maybe if you're like in fetishy stuff, it might have some sort of like fetish accessory or whatever, but like that's it. Like it's so much different than like a fursuit, you know, where it's like a huge barrier to entry, and it's like that feels like a mandatory thing.
I'm very glad that, like, I mean, you mentioned the upper end limit is only like $500 or something, which I feel is a lot more accessible. It can go
pretty high. Yeah. It just depends, you know, like if you pay some like private, like professional studio modeler, like this one guy that I know, he spent like $4,000 on this model, but he paid like some like Pixar guy to make it. Like that's like, you know, that's the equivalent of buying like a Bugatti, but like, you know, it's cool, but like, I don't feel the need that I need to spend $4,000 on a model. It's just, it's differing perceptions that are like given, that I feel like create two different environments. The problem with like steering back to fursuits is there's not really like an easy solution. You know, like they're so integral to the community that like you can't just remove fursuits, and I wouldn't want that, you know. But at the same time, you also just can't remove like the stigmata associated with needing to own one.
Maybe it's just like a symptom of economic inequality in general, right? Like you have a divide in incomes, and maybe people on the lower end wouldn't be able to afford one, and the people on the upper end would be able to afford more and more expensive suits, right? So maybe that's a topic that I might want to research, right? Like the broader economic divide kind of like has a microcosm in the furry community.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a thing I would agree with.
Especially in like our service economy, where I mean, you have, I mean, incomes tend to be stratified in service economies in general.
But I mean, that's really not like something you yourself can control, you know?
I don't know, I think it's still helpful to address it.
It's helpful to address, but at the end of the day, it's like I would say this is a strange comparison to make, but I would say like the problem with fursuits is not something you can really solve easily. That's like so societally based. It's like, because it's just, you know, you can't fix that. Like there's not a perfect way, because you could say like, oh well, maybe if by policing the like flexing nature of some individuals, it's like, well yeah, but still is like that's a societal thing, you know. As a like humanity as a whole has become like, we've reached like the flex age pretty much in the last couple of years, It's like, so at the end of the day,
Yeah.
fursuits, while they present problems, there's not really a solution. Like, don't get rid of all fursuits. Never, no. I mean, fuck, I can't be, I'm a hypocrite in a way
mean,
because
what?
I own a fursuit as well, but I don't wear it.
Yeah, I own one, but I don't wear it either. I just have like a few pictures on like Twitter and my like YouTube channel, but that's about it. But yeah, I mean, interesting topic, but I mean, what do you think about the Twitter situation? I mean, do you want Twitter to be gone? I mean, personally, in the long run, I just think Twitter is kind of a toxic environment, and at least in the long run, it might be good if Twitter wasn't the main platforms furries were on.
Also, all social media is inherently toxic at the end of the day. I don't
Yeah.
want Twitter to die.
It's just that like
Definitely don't agree with aspects of it.
I think I've heard that it's a little bit designed to facilitate drama, right? For example, you're limited to a certain amount of characters, and based on that, like you're probably not going to be able to make any nuanced statements, and the responses aren't very nuanced. I mean, you can say you can like string along like multiple posts, but I mean it's not exactly convenient to scroll through all of them, right? So what ends up happening is that people tend to just look at one post and go off of that, right? Which I feel kind of facilitates this believe the first thing that you hear, and platforms matter more than anything else, right? But I don't know, I don't know like any actual solution to that, because I'm not someone who develops applications like that, so I don't know the sociological aspects of that. But I mean, those are definitely issues that I can observe on Twitter.
I mean, hell, apparently the owner of Twitter right now doesn't even know how to develop that shit. So
Yeah, he just inherited a bunch of money. He was benefit from.
I don't really want to get into like the Elon Musk stuff.
Yeah.
I'm more just making
like the
a
South
joke
Africa
because like
shit.
nah, I mean, I'm not really here to talk about like Elon Musk's blah blah blah, but I was more making a joke at like how they don't even know how to run it themselves. But
Yeah.
Twitter, I don't know. I don't want it to die. I think it's a fine social media. A lot of artists and stuff rely on it, so to have that kind of cut would be like very much detrimental to a lot of people's livelihoods, and I would very much not like to see that happen.
I mean, I just
so many
hope
people
there
are
was an
reliant on it. That's the thing, there isn't. So if the
Yeah.
platform dies, like a lot of people whose whole careers are just based on this one platform are pretty much just fucked, and I don't want to see that happen. As much as I do not care for the platform itself, I would rather not see it like burn and crash because of how many people's livelihoods would just poof.
Or about
Granted,
just people
all
like
the recent
moving
stuff
on
made
to another
people
platform.
more. Yeah, I mean, people, but like even then, like currently, I don't know. Regardless, I think I want Twitter to still just stay Twitter. Despite my grievances, I still think it's a necessary evil in today's world to be an online like creator of any
what about
sort.
changing Twitter so like, for example, with the character limit, like removing the character limit, right? Or at least making it like so high that you can like write an essay on it, right? I feel like that would be helpful.
I mean, I think maybe having the option to do that, but then it being restricted as like a set method of tweeting, so you have to like click to read more past the 250 character limit by all means, but I don't think I don't want to go on Twitter and have it be like Tumblr where it's like people write like whole fucking novels in their posts, and I'm sitting there like shifting through like, okay, get to the point, like especially when it's like on a timeline where I'm also trying to pay attention to like however many X other things.
I don't know. I mean,
That just boils down to personal preference more than anything. No, not really. I mean, the only other thing I would ever discuss is like the lack of personality in the fandom sometimes.
Oh yeah, go
but
ahead.
I feel like we kind of touched up on that. I mean, just a minor point.
Yeah.
This kind of touches back to like, fursuit being a personality.
Mhm.
I would say that there's another like set of like I'd say like another thing that's close to that I also have a problem with is people who think like asexuality is itself a personality, and I feel like that's one of the other big things is I see a lot of like content creators and stuff, especially furries, that are like their personality is just gay,
Right.
and it's like it's like the crowd goes wild. I'll never forget.
I don't get
There's
it,
a streamer.
honestly.
His name is like JT Wusky.
Yeah.
Interesting guy. I met him in person. Was like at stayed in an apartment with him and a few other people.
Yeah.
Like back in January, for like a week or for like a weekend. And it's an interesting guy in person, but like a lot of his stream boils down to like, I'm gay, haha, and like people like that. And I'll never forget someone on Twitter like took his tweets and like put them all together, and it was just like the tweet was like, when gay is your only personality trait. And it was like literally like 50 times he just literally his tweet was just like, haha, I'm gay, or like, you know, some sort of like subtle thing like, what if we like made out and you were a boy or some shit. And it's like, and apparently that struck an chord with him, because he was like, I'm sorry, I misrepresented it this way, and people were like white knighting for him. And I'm over here just like, well, I mean, that is the thing though. He is just like gay personality type, and I hate that. There's so many like, especially on Twitch, people that are like that in the furry fandom.
I think I really have to go to something, but I mean, I'm really glad you came on. Like I think, I don't know, I've had a lot of situations where people flaked on me for this kind of thing, so I mean, I really appreciate that you're able to stay on the dot. And I mean, I guess for someone who streams on a regular basis and someone who has to like go by a schedule, that's not really much of a surprise, right? But anyways,
yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, thanks for watching, everyone. I'm sorry for not posting as much as I usually do, but you know, finals, so yeah.